Broken Thing, Chapter 24. Zanar set first to building her the library Garrus Fanning had requested. He asked her about every preference from color to method. He had found a way to make direct implantation of information free of pain. He could even augment it with pleasure if she wished, but she chose paper books with a digital copy of each for easy, searchable reference, as she lacked Drell memory. For construction, space was not infinite. Illusion could be. It took adjustment of existing technology that was not intended for aesthetics but for production. Physical books could be created and destroyed, projections cast. She would believe in the illusion when primed to do so. The finished location was warm and green and golden, wood and welcome. She had found Beckenstein cold and soulless. That was, of course, why he had enjoyed it. Where she had been surrounded by white and polish, metal and glass, now she had a space of warmth and soul. It was an enclosed space, but did not appear that way. Open to the sky, an infinite referential illusion of stacks of books receding into an ordered, warm distance in one cardinal direction. A space she could browse and search, the illusion adjusting with her. Upon choosing a volume, the digital copy could be manufactured and provided. From the ordered space of the books themselves, the library spilled from ordered civility into ordered and then progressively more wild nature in the other three cardinal directions, starting with an open pavilion and traditional seating and shade. Then it branched off into forest in one direction, sea in another, meadow with mountains in the distance for the third. She favored the forest and the meadow, though she spent time at the shore of the ocean, usually not reading, but thinking. There were flowers and fruit trees from any number of worlds. She reclined on grass or trunk with butterflies in her hair, or sitting by running water in the sun. The first trees he had created were apple. She then expressed that it was a shame the trees did not bloom and bear fruit at the same time, because that would be beautiful. Therefore, he provided trees that did exactly that. He gained his inspiration from her. She enjoyed taking her time and reading slowly, saying that having the information implanted didn't draw a unique map to the information. Information that's implanted doesn't have time to make friends with the neighbors before it's roped off and isolated whole. Information should have trajectories and collisions, and that's part of the fun. He preferred gathering information in the friendless fashion. He preferred the cold and soulless. This differential in temperaments and experience with each other once again drew him to consult her on method. His intent of dark space was proven to be metaphorically appealing, but practically unwise upon further reflection. He presented the issue to her as an intellectual issue, and her answer was, "Momentum in space in a straight line doesn't cost much, but whatever energy is consumed must be replaced. Darkness will provide no energy, and the only real factor that is infinite here is time. There will come a moment when the energy consumption will overwhelm the energy stored. Power is only a theoretically infinite source, in the sense that it can be infinitely gathered and recycled, but to gather it, there must be an external source of power. Otherwise, there's the risk of being in darkness so long that no course can be set, and the only factor is momentum that has already been built. Insufficient energy to brake, accelerate, or change course. If something halts that momentum, eventually the second law of thermodynamics will have its way. Entropy will demand that energy bleeds off, structure breaks down, reduction in temperature to absolute zero. No movement, no possible action. To compensate, set a trajectory that's sufficient to gather energy from natural sources without being pulled into gravity wells. Singular, elliptical, and meandering orbits from star to star can be projected, a course set, and the problem of energy consumption will be managed without predictability of trajectory. Control over destination and power source is maintained with the craft having maximum energy with minimal drain and optimal maneuverability and defense whenever required. He took her advice in several ways. He plotted a course to keep to those guidelines. He maintained his fear of her. Her metaphorical description matched him as well as the Reaper. Left on his own, he would reach absolute zero. In her gravity well, he would fall into her twin suns and burn. If he wished partnership, he must achieve equilibrium and maneuverability, and above all, optimal control over changing circumstance. Her gravity was formidable, and he was a god of freedom only as long as she was a goddess of contentment. Freed, she would kill him, take the Reaper, and work her will, and that was unacceptable under any circumstances at any time. He could not afford entropy or gravity, only elliptical and random, where he could be warmed by her and inspired by her, yet not drawn from his nature. He maintained control over the Reaper, and that was his domain. She was a creature of pure information and pure experience, and he shared in that, as varied in possibility as music. New composition always possible, old inspirations welcomed with closed eyes and raised voice, layers and layers of association. She would have enjoyed pets, perhaps a cat, but he blocked her access to that impulse. She retained the memory of Hale, but not the future wish to care for an animal. She did not wish for a zoo. Captive animals upset her. She also expressed interest in children, but that he would not allow. Too much of a potential drain upon her time. If she wished for companionship, she would find it in him. Now that it no longer mattered, she had access to all languages. There were potentially hundreds of thousands of unique languages to explore and learn with Reaper databases, the combined databases of the Citadel and home worlds. She was kept happily busy with her explorations of the knowledge gathered and created over endless cycles of Reaper harvest. Time was unchanging in the library. Always a sunny day. Time, in fact, no longer mattered. On Beckenstein she had no access to timekeeping. Now neither did he. It took a long time to break the habit, but ultimately he embraced it as a luxury. The needs of the body could be muted or eliminated so as not to interrupt her studies. He could remove the need for sleep from her, as he had done for himself, a state he could indulge in or not, as he chose. But he enjoyed finding her sleeping, feeling her sleeping, a state to be celebrated. It was sculpted by him, by her choices, and the ones he indulged, the ones he denied. She had no nightmares. He eased her from painful thoughts by keeping them always out of her reach. They were there, but she eventually did not touch them. He never took Garrus fanning from her, but he did assure that they did not touch. Her bondmate was as unreachable as the mountains in the library. Seen and believed to be real, yet beyond a certain point of repetition and priming, it never would occur to her to walk there. Sennar was always in contact with her, became accustomed to the flow of her thoughts like waves crashing upon a shore in her unique patterns. He learned to read, to feel, to predict. He knew when she was inspired, when she was tired, when she was contemplative, when the fast and scalding torrent engaged her in a fever of thought. When she was fully engaged in her information gathering, he left her to her timelessness. There was nowhere to be, no need to meet. He could always call her, but he enjoyed seeking her out at her perfect times according to her rhythm. He waited. He watched. He hunted her, stalked her, and that was according to his own rhythms. He'd find her in the sun, a book set aside, and one hand on grass or bark, fingers trailing in running water. She'd have gathered new thoughts and new freckles, his fingertips along her skin. He never grew tired of the pleasure of waking her, her languorous sighs and welcome. She wanted him to know everything she knew, gain some pleasure from resonance of thought. He had always hoarded each fact as power. She knew knowledge was power, but she wished to share, to expand rather than exploit, wished to give her power away as fast as she gained it, wished to give it to him. She enjoyed being informative, telling stories, and he was her rapt audience. Her head against his chest, and her near anxious energy in the telling, until with enough assurance she kept the enthusiasm but lost the sense that she was taking up time. He would remind her there were no limits to time. She could and should tell him everything. That was why he sought her out. He wanted to know whatever it was she wished to say. She was inspiring in her composition of music, of living, but that could not always be translated into a thing he could create for her, an illusion he could spin, but there was endless time. Her inspirations would take him much longer to create than they would take her to gather into herself. There were days she studied history, her eyes brighter. She'd express that there was something she wished to see or wished to experience spontaneously. Then he would take that memory of discovery from her. If she wished to see the obsidian palisades on Querna, or thought a day in history of the Protheans would have been extraordinary to witness, he would create that place, that experience for her, and she would be surprised that it existed, that he brought her to it. He gave her no explanation as to who or what they were. Eventually she stopped asking, stopped wondering as to her circumstances and nature. Her previous frameworks of existence were no longer of use. She was as different from Cara fanning now as a butterfly was from a caterpillar. He spoke to her in poetry of transformation, and she was transformed. A creature of inspiration and experience, an avatar of such things. No explanation of who had chosen them for this. They were not elected gods or given powers. They simply were as they were. He blurred transition and reality for her, sculpted her in sleep and waking, kept the woman he feared and wanted until his body called him to her wherever she was, whatever her rhythm, and she welcomed him each time with her smile, with her stories, with moans on her lips. Her stories told might end with her inspiration spent, her eyes nearly drifting closed as her breath grew heavy against his chest. He would hold her, listen to the water, admire the trees for their hybrid beauty, apple next to Galliphon, next to Corallon, a silver-barked tree with spiraling flowers and scarlet that spun to the ground in ribbons, a tree extinct for 50 million years that she had rediscovered and he had created for her. She was unaware that the tree had been her inspiration. She had not known she wanted a library. She only knew he gave her one, modified it for her with ideas like trees that no longer existed, those who bore flower and fruit simultaneously. Whatever he created for her was always exactly what she wanted without knowing she had wanted it that way. She grew to accept that as her due, no longer doubted she deserved it, yet never lost her joy in whatever gift he presented. He created the obsidian palisades. He created pageantry of history, and they traveled through her enthusiasms and hopes. He was warmed and kept to his elliptical course, spaces between them, and time for him to cool and create as she warmed and gathered her inspirations close. He did create for her a ballroom, gowns, and music. He learned every style of dance that had been recorded. In her presence he adopted the warm and the slow, enjoyed her hair through his fingertips, combed and pinned it himself with her eyes downcast and her smile warm, patient with him and his vagaries and fussing. He still enjoyed painting her nails, creating illusions in the lacquer that shifted and glowed. He never asked her to be perfection at dancing. If shoes or clothing pained her, he removed the pain, did not ask her to endure. Here he was in his element as she was in her element in her library. He always led, and she always adapted. With endless practice she became her own interpretation of dance that carried through all the styles, joy and the flash of her eyes. His practice and form always magnitudes of order greater than hers, and it did not matter, next to the graceful touch of her hand on his sleeve, except that she was unique and all he desired. They had their rooms. He created and called her to the ballroom, or the Drel Nafor, a training space for martial arts. This one was a reproduction of where he had been trained for assassin work years on end. He learned everything there was to be known of combat methods and taught them to her one by one. In this realm it was the same as dance, power rippling through his body and biotics flaring. She was grace in concession and striving to learn, ending, as always, with her body beneath his, flushed, with her face rapt with appreciation of his ability that she would never match, given an eternity to try. And she did try. Every moment this woman tried to reach the bar of physical precision he set, and she never resented a moment of his easy victory, anticipated and reveled in the inevitable end of whatever dance or whatever match he wished as demonstration and foreplay. She always ended, pinned beneath his body, overwhelmed and swept away, panting, with her body tired and her eyes bright, and his now endless stamina and enthusiasm for her body expressed with the timeless tide he cultivated in himself, those orbits where he came closest to her, risking losing himself and finding that risk irresistible. He learned her mind and her body, pouring lust and devotion into her and delivering blind cruelties she thanked him for, each layer like rich lacquer that shifted and glowed. He kept his promise that she would always remember, but humans were so very prone to forgetfulness, her mind not built for eternity, not like his had been rebuilt. It was easy to suggest to her that certain things be forgotten as unimportant. Over time, Gareth's fanning was the mountains, and then the haze, and then the clouds, and then the distant horizon, and then as important as what she had had for breakfast in some distant past. Relevant and life-giving at the time, entirely unremarkable now. Whatever now was, he would give her life. He would always give her life. One of his blind cruelties he enjoyed while her eyes and her nails and her hopes glowed bright enough to radiate, which he gathered as energy. You are she, and I am he, and we will feel like this together, always together, if parted, seeking She will know he through the sound, from this sight, from hands on skin and venom only, and ever this. They were most times nameless and speechless, but there came a day where she ventured into his mind of her own accord something he had desired, something it took him a great deal of time to discover, first that she was doing it, second that she wished to do it. Among his creations he decided to dedicate space to a pawn Ifa table and relished the idea of teaching her how to play. He was a pawn Ifa master, the game somewhat like human chess but much more intricate, and having elements of hijacking, as superior to direct assault. He ushered her into the pawn Ifa tent with traditional firepots and hanging fabrics, breeze and starlight, and beauty in the rich barbaric style of Rakana. He wore a replica of his Tseni garb and created one for her in her colors, bands of woven rich fabric given to those who served Rakana's needs. If ever anyone had served the children of Rakana, it was her. She would also serve a child of Rakana for eternity, and that service should be acknowledged. He had changed his colors to those of Senar Tualan, and he was now as she was, as close to a reflection of his original genetics as possible. His Tseni, which had been the green and black of Thane Krios, now reflected not a taken identity, but a reclaimed one. Sennar had been born silver and black, blurred to iridescent grays where the colors blended. He was the night sky, nebula, and stars where she was the burnished sun, pale sands, and the green of the leaves that depended upon her for their life as he did. He ushered her to her seat and took his own, and prepared to explain the game to her in her style, with the information granted slowly, allowing it its trajectories and collisions. She smiled at him and said she knew how to play. This seemed impossible, first that she did, and second that he did not know that she did. He knew of her love of Rakana's history. He scanned his memory as he watched her smile, and he realized that, yes, he knew of her knowledge of Rakana's history, and the subject of pawn Ifa existing had arisen, but he had not asked her if she knew how to play, assuming that of course she did not. Pawn Ifa was a Drell creation and a tightly held secret. He had not chosen to teach it to her at Bekenstein because the fewer opportunities she had to exercise her mind toward escape, the better. It had been similar in the choice to send her to sleep with a chip. It had been like the choices to exercise without her watching, or not have her demonstrate her skills. It was avoiding whistling in the dark, concealing potential as was his instinct. He had owned a pawn Ifa set and a chess set at the estate, but some of his choices had been dictated by concealing her identity. The pawn Ifa set had been taken as offered tribute from the highest ranked master of the game that he had challenged years ago. This set before him was a replica of that one. He had beaten every ranked player and had not been defeated since age 17. However, had he permitted her to play chess at Bekenstein, no doubt she would have been challenged to a match by a guest, if he had allowed it. His small and quiescent Dralafa would have destroyed every contender. Although he relished watching her casually and demurely devastate the guests at Bekenstein, no doubt he would have been challenged to play her at some point, and that he would not have enjoyed as much. It would also risk others seeing her eyes in their revealed glory, and that was a loss, but a prudent choice. He had suspected she would win against him at pawn Ifa, perhaps, eventually, but the game would ultimately take years of dedication in anyone's life. They had only had months. His training her had encompassed other subjects, and then there had been no time to gaze at her over a pawn Ifa table. Now he sat back and savored her smile. The significance of this contentious realm as kaleidoscopic as the patterns on their tsini. He asked her, "Shall we play then, Siha?" Another ironic name. A Siha was a warrior angel of the goddess Arashu, a tenacious protector, fierce in wrath. He no longer believed there was a goddess named Arashu, for she certainly would have destroyed him had there been any justice in the galaxy. If there was a goddess, it was his Cara, as his elevated creation. She did not serve herself or Arashu. She served him. She protected him, fierce in wrath. It suited her. She smiled, inclined her head, and the game began. He delved deeper into her mind, beyond the rhythm of her tides, into the specifics of her thought, or tried. She seemed to see the game shattered and whole simultaneously beyond his ability to comprehend or follow. Her symbols and intent moved as quickly and without thought as his body did in motion, in combat, and dance, beyond his ability or ordered sequence as Drell. Dizzying. He suddenly had no doubt that she knew the game, yet could not tell if the chaos was human or intentional, a lack of comprehension or a depth of understanding he would never reach, any more than she would be able to pin him to the ground in a grapple without his cooperation. He moved first and attempted to reach into her mind, but the same chaos and potential assaulted him, the difference between physics and quantum physics, his mind ordered and predictable, hers spinning potential and capacity, impossible to measure, both at the same time before one factor had changed. He began one move ahead and lagged further and further behind as she moved. He was unable to project what she would be doing, where she would be going, and the moves in his head seemed logical. And logical was no longer sufficient compared to her storm. He made his moves, convinced he was ahead, and her chaos was an experience, only to find his pieces hijacked, one by one, easily and lazily, her eyes those of the assured goddess of her realm to which he had delivered her. He did not know if she suggested moves to him as he suggested actions and sculpture to her. If so, it was beyond his capacity to understand. In the chaotic blur she presented, the devastating storm on the board and in her mind transferred to his. His order pushed off its potential axis. Had she been in his mind? Was she now? Would she later? How? He saw the spiral of the gravity well, twin suns, and her smile. He saw exactly what he had always feared in her, and welcomed it into his silent dark. He gazed at her and asked her simply how, without words, only the impulse to know. The chaotic storm of the board disappeared, and there was the quiet order of a young girl in her realm, in a room in Mindwar, playing Panifa against herself because the woman that taught her to play, and her parents, could not provide a challenge, so she provided it to herself. He would never beat her, no matter how many moves ahead she revealed to him, or how many of his own moves he attempted to conceal from her. It was her due. He was her due. She was his doom, and he had embraced that fate. Her eyes did not blaze, but were calm. Garrus Fanning was not forgotten or faded in any form. Sennar Tualan was known in any color or chameleon illusion. She knew all inspiration as hers. There was no hostility or hate. She was forgiveness and eternity, gravity and inevitability. With Panifa, each move must be made until the end. There was no conceding. There would be no conceding. He lost. His moves known, hers obscured, his pieces hijacked and turned in on his doyenne until she was taken. His siha, ensuring each possible piece was turned to her liking. She did not go for the kill, early or soon. She arrived with all strength at her back, and nothing remaining to him but surrender. Garrus Fanning and her parents stood at her shoulders. He imagined if he looked hard enough he would see them. They were long gone, in body and spirit, but not in her memory. He had not supplanted or replaced them. She had hidden them from him somehow, and her allies grew. He had never had an ally. He never would. He smiled at her. She would not turn the Reaper around if she gained control. She had nothing to return to, and a bargain struck, an opposition to uphold, her chosen burden in him, her eternal problem she would not allow another to bear. He remembered an earlier conversation and echoed it, their shared memories, treasured things. He did not speak, intending his mouth to be occupied with hers, which it was as the game ended, and he knew he would play again. She would beat him each time, and he would try to discover why and how, and would not. He could and should kill her in this moment, but that would not happen. Instead, he wanted her more than he had at any point in their history. Neither of them would kill the other. He was beyond it, and she would still never be free to do it. With his speed, his ardor, and the full choice of playing the game out to the end, her body was under his mouth to hers, her hands captured in one of his touch to her mind rich in irony. Siha, these moments are mine, and I treasure each one, and hope to keep you just as you are, just where you are. When your moment arrives, will you kill me quickly? You will live forever, Sennar. My thanks for your mercilessness. You are welcome. She was merciless, the storm, and he was lights in the sky, far away and weak. She was gravity and suns, inescapable, all things needed and sought by him. He must circle her or die, brought to his absolute zero. He was her due, and she would claim him when she chose, might have already, had already, was through and of and in his mind in every corner that he looked, no longer his own. He would wait, trembling, for her call, and she would or would not give it according to her whim. She had never needed him. She had always been blinding, and now she was revealing, bright and hot, searing as he fell. She had healed. She was whole, and he was broken. The realms blurred and transformed from caterpillar to butterfly. Knowledge was hers, and had always been. The fight was his, but she would always claim the match. The dance was his, but she would always claim the music. For how long had he served her, and only her? For how long would he wish to do only that, beg for the right? Her answer, "You will love me always." He did. He had. He would.